I was just listening to Kenneth Madden on YouTube, and he was talking about poetry and how poetry is essentially non-duality. That what a poet is doing with a poem is pointing to what can't be spoken in words, can't be grasped, but it's an attempt. The poet is trying to point, use the words in the poem, this physical form of duality, which is what we have, which I'm doing right now. This, the words in space, whatever that is, language. We don't know what it is, how language is able to hold life, so-called meaning, again, we don't know what meaning is, but with a poem, a poet tries to point to that, to the essence of what is somehow held in these forms of language and words and speech and communication, motion, the body, these separate forms, and these apparently separate ones, people. So the poet apparently is separate from the reader, or the listener of the poem, apparently separate. These apparently separate words and this apparently separate experience is somehow, by the poem, by the writing of the poem, and by the hearing of the poem, by the sharing of the poem, the reality of the poem somehow conveys or holds or communicates, or again, who knows what any of those words mean to communicate, but it's communicating the what is. That's the thing there is to communicate. I think he calls it aliveness. Maybe that's from Tony, but the aliveness is what the poem is about. It is. It's somehow a vessel, a vehicle for the aliveness, trying to touch it with words and get as close as we can. So, Kenneth was he was talking about poetry and the use of language in that way, but really all art is that. When we paint a painting or play music or dance, or it's a short step to actually, that is what everything is. What is this everything? So all of the so-called human, every moment of human action, whatever that is. And what is human action? Human is action, right? And it's life, it's aliveness as human, which includes the words, the language, the communication, all these different forms. It's the aliveness appearing as a form in duality, because without the duality is the key to all this. You don't have any form without duality. You don't have language. You don't have communication. you don't have a human experience at all without the vehicle for that is duality. Well, I was going to say mechanism. That's not a very good word, but the modality, but it's the way that the aliveness appears. Again, there's no appearance without duality. What would be appearing without an apparent separation, without an apparent appearance separated from everything else? And so you wouldn't have anything without duality, and duality is the appearance. It's the way it all appears. It's the way it can appear. In other words, it's the thing that enables appearance. Enables the aliveness to be an appearance, which means it can be shared, it can be talked, it can be lived in communication, which means relationship. All the things that humans do, creation. So now we're back to the poem. So I would say, and I think this is what, I don't want to speak for Kenneth, but I think that's what he's saying. It's inevitable. It's impossible not to get the fact that the poem, which is really just putting this aliveness into duality, creating a dualistic version, a dualistic appearance of the aliveness that can be appreciated, beheld, shared. Again, we're running out of words. What is it that we're doing? But it's this. This is what I'm saying. I think that's what he was saying. That what the poet is doing with the poem is what this is, what we're doing right here, and what we're always doing, whatever it is. You know, whether it's dropping a bomb on a city, or planting a flower, or going to work, going to the job, or coming home and drinking tea. That's all the poetry. And those are all poems. They're the aliveness put into form. And that's all we have. So this is it here. And there's in a sense, the communication of non-duality, the pointing, I mean, it's completely superfluous. Well, it's funny. It's not needed. It's because this is what is. This is what's going on. All this activity is essentially just the aliveness appearing, and to point to that is trivial, but it's done. I'm doing it here because somehow that isn't noticed. There's a not noticing of the aliveness, of the non-dual quality of quality. It's not even a quality. Then just what is isn't separate. It's aliveness. It's unseparateness, whatever it is. But it's appearing in all these separate forms. So it somehow isn't noticed. It isn't noticed that it's all poetry, that it's all dance, it's all music. And again, the music is the aliveness as a form. It's just aliveness, just non-dual this, but being carried as a dualistic form. And that's what there is. And it's never one or the other, right? It's never, they're the same thing. But the point is, it isn't noticed, generally. So Kenneth has to point it out. So Yeats, with his poem, has to point it out. So, Mozart and Beethoven have to do their pointing in the form of that particular noise, like this noise and all the noise that's going on, the noise of the birds, the noise of the traffic, the air conditioner, all these formal expressions of the unformed, the formless, the spaceless, the timeless. Well, that's what is, that's what's here. And it's being orchestrated somehow in all this form, all this appearance. None of it has any meaning. Where would it get meaning? How do you get meaning out of all of that? There would have to be somebody standing outside figuring out what the significance of it all, what it means, right? What it's pointing to. But it's all just pointing to itself. And so the person who talks about it is pointing back to the same thing, and it's pointing back to us. We can play around with that kind of imagery. So, that to talk about it is to make poems, to make poetry about it. That's all we can do. And I'm always, trying to find words to talk about it, and the words, it's not always the best poetry, but the words always fail anyway, and they're meant to, they're designed to fail. The failing is what it all is. The failing to say. The sayness, the sayingness. I don't know, the aliveness. How can you say the aliveness? You can't. But you can't not either, because it's happening. It's happening by talking. And kind of what I was saying, Kenneth was saying, well, that's what a poet does, and I'm saying, yeah. And then, I would say that's what everything does. It's what all the words are about. The poetry and the label on the tea bag, and that's all it is. There's nothing else. There's no communication that isn't that. And that's what communication, so-called, whatever that is. It's communicating, what is it? Aliveness, communicating aliveness to aliveness. That's the trick that's going on, the trick that's here. So